In 2013, Kanye West announced to the world that he had just signed a brand new partnership with Adidas. 2 years later, in 2015, they would release their very first shoe collaborating together. The Adidas Yeezy partnership generated billions of dollars for both Kanye West and Adidas themselves. In total, they released 266 different pairs of shoes together, all the way up until October the 25th, 2022, when they announced that the Adidas and Yeezy partnership was over. Now, even though it's been well over a year since the partnership ended, Adidas decided to continue releasing the rest of the inventory that they had stuck in their warehouse because the whole collaboration ended so suddenly. But here in 2024, pretty much all of the shoes have been released, so I thought it'd be a great time to kind of mark this collaboration in history and look back on every single pair that ever released. So we're going to be going through these Yeezys in a very specific order. The most common pair that you can find and the rarest Yeezy that you can find. And at the very end of the video, I'm going to crown the best, most underrated, and the worst out of all of the models put together. Strap in, it's going to be a big one, so let's get started. The Yeezy 350 V2. I think a lot of you guys could have guessed this one. By far the most common Yeezy model that they ever released. Now, as we go through all of these, I'm going to be giving you guys the best colorway, the most underrated colorway, and the worst colorway. So in total, the 350 V2 had 71 different colorways. The first colorway that dropped was this one right over here, the Yeezy 350 V2 Beluga. They dropped September the 24th, 2016. And honestly, I think they did a pretty good job with the 350 V2. Like, it was a massive upgrade from the V1s. It's incredibly comfortable. I think people kind of got a little bit kind of annoyed at all of the colorways that they were doing because a lot of them were pretty similar. Nevertheless, they had a good run. So I think the best colorway I'm going to crown out of all of the different 350s has got to be the Zebra. And the most underrated colorway for me has to be the Ash Stone. It's a little bit more of a low-key one, but I just feel like the, you know, kind of distressing on the upper with the color, the black and the red stripe, I thought looked really good. And then the worst colorway out of all of them has to be the Yeezy 350 Mono Mist. That's when they decided to put plastic as the knitted upper for some reason. It wears really bad, like all of the stitching kind of comes undone, and yeah, just overall by far the worst, at least in my opinion. The very last Yeezy 350 V2 colorway that you could have bought was the Steel Gray, which dropped in 2023. Now, this one got a lot of attention for being the unapproved Yeezy 350. Basically, Ye went on Instagram and said that he did not approve this colorway, and Adidas went ahead and released it anyway. So yeah, that one's kind of shrouded in some sort of controversy, but that's the final one that they dropped. The second most common Yeezy that you're gonna find is the Yeezy Foam Runner. 21 different colorways of the Yeezy Foam Runner were released. The first one being the Ararat colorway that dropped in 2020. Now, the final Yeezy Foam Runner that released was the Carbon colorway, which was actually pretty similar to a couple other different ones that they also dropped, but that was also a 2023 release for those. So the best colorway has to be these, in my opinion, the Sand colorway. I know the Ararat is practically the exact same thing, but this one was just a little bit easier to get your hands on. It's one that, yeah, I absolutely love. I've got like 2, maybe even 3 pairs of these things, as you can see in the background. The most underrated colorway, I think, is the Stone Sage. It's like a little bit of a mixture effect, and I just thought that they always went with a bunch of different outfits really well. And the worst colorway, in my opinion, has to be the Clay Red. They're just a little bit too clay and a little bit too red, and they just kind of look awkward on that model. Following very close behind the Yeezy Foam Runner, the next most common is the Yeezy 380. They made 20 different colorways on this model. The first one that dropped was the Alien colorway back in 2019. It's a very interesting pair of shoes. I feel like they changed the name of this pair at very last minute because it was leaked and rumored to be the new Yeezy 350 V3, and it kind of makes sense because it has so much in common with the V2s and I guess kind of the V1s, but last minute they swapped it out, and I know that Adidas has even made some shoe boxes that say V3 on it for this pair of shoes. Now, the very last colorway that you could have got on the 380s was the Pyrite colorway from 2021. So yeah, they put this silhouette to bed pretty early. I also will say they have dropped 20 different colorways on this model, but a lot of them were the same. So they did this weird thing, they also did it with the 350s, where they would release the same same colorway twice, except one of them was reflective, the other one was non-reflective. This was a little bit of a weird thing. It was kind of like marketing, because they would make the reflective versions incredibly limited and then the regular ones like not that limited. So it kind of just drew a little bit more hype towards the reflective versions. But yeah, it just oversaturated this model, and I feel like they could have done some more colorways, because I think overall the 380 is a massively underrated sneaker. The best colorway on the 380s has to be the calcite glow. It's pretty much like a all over white pair of shoes until you step outside and then back inside and they just light up. The most underrated colorway I think has to be the Yakerite. It was extremely limited. I believe only dropped in Asia or the US, but just a really nice color combination. And then the worst, I think, is pretty easy. It's the highlight colorway, the vomit colorway. Next up is the Yeezy Slide. We're getting a little bit more, you know, a little bit less common. The Yeezy Slide has to be one of the most popular Yeezy models. Everybody seemed to love these things, and I think it definitely is a combination of like the looks, but also the practicality. These things are like one of the most comfortable things that you can put on your feet. They originally released the Yeezy Slide back in June of 2019, and funny story is they dropped 3 colorways at the same time, which all kind of sat. They had the Desert Sand, the Bone colorway, and the Resin colorway, and nobody seemed to really like them when they first launched. It took a while for them to sell out, unlike other Yeezy models, which would just fly. Now, the final release of these things, the last time they ever dropped a slide, a new colorway, was the Carbons from 2023. But I think the best colorway that they dropped on the Yeezy Slide has to be this one, which is the Bone colorway. The most underrated, I think, is the Inflame Orange, a super nice bright orange color. Definitely not as wearable, but super nice for a pair of slides. And then the worst colorway is probably got to be the Slate Marine, just because it looked so similar to the rest of them, and it's just kind of like a little bit black, but not really. So yeah, it's just, yeah, that's not my favorite. Next up, we got the iconic Yeezy 700 V1. The first time we saw the 700 V1 model was this colorway, the Wave Runners from 2017. And kind of like the Yeezy Slides, when they first launched this specific pair, people hated them. There was memes flooding around online. People said that these kind of look like jet skis and that they're just super ugly. But it's funny, because if you ask a lot of people, especially sneakerheads, most of them would say that this is their favorite Yeezy ever now. So it just shows what time does. Now, the last time that you could have bought a new colorway on the 700 model was the high-res red colorway from 2022. But obviously, and I think this is pretty predictable, but the best colorway on this model has to be the original Wave Runner. It's so unique and it really defines this silhouette pretty perfectly. The most underrated colorway, though, I think has to be the 700 V1 Magnet. That one was also very limited. You don't see them very often, and it's just a really nice color combination. It kind of tones things down from the Wave Runner, but still has, you know, some splashes of brightness. And then the worst colorway, in my opinion, has to be the Fade Azure. In total, they only dropped 15 different colorways of the 700 V1. I feel like I wish that they dropped a bunch more. Next up, we got the Yeezy 500 with only 14 different colorways ever released. They originally dropped back in 2018, and this was the first colorway that we saw. It's called Blush. Now, the last colorway that you could have ever bought was actually pretty recent, 2023. That was the Stone Taupe one, or the all over white with the gum outsole. I think the 500 definitely kind of gives me like the old Yeezy vibes, like when they were dropping the 700 V1, kind of like those iconic Yeezy models. And it definitely is a solid pair of shoes. You've got really nice materials and it's decently comfortable. But the best colorway has to be the original. At least for me personally, this Blush colorway, a really nice kind of, you know, deserty, slightly tan, slightly gray color, very, very wearable. The most underrated one, I think, has to be the Stone. It's a pretty unique pair of the 500s because it has all of this neoprene padding instead of the mesh. And it really changes the entire look of the pair of shoes, and it's also like slightly more comfortable because there's just more padding on the upper. And then I think the worst colorway has to be the Inflame. It's just, yeah, it's just a bit too loud. Next up, we got the Yeezy Quantum with just the same as the 500s, 14 different colorways released on these. Now, the original launch was this colorway, just kind of called the OG Quantum colorway, and that was back in 2020, February the 16th for All-Star Weekend. I remember it so well because this was probably one of the most chaotic and hyped released Yeezys of all time. This was a shoe that was leaked and rumored for a very long time. People were excited to see what Yeezy had to bring to the table in terms of a performance basketball shoe. And when they released these things, it was super weird. They came through in Sherp trucks, and they drove through Chicago, and and were handing out pairs of these. Not just handing out for free, they were also trading them. So they were like, hey, if you give me the shoes off of your feet, I'll give you this pair of Quantums. And people were trading like the Fear of God basketball shoes that they did with Nike from back in the day. Yeah, it was crazy. Now, the last colorway that you could have got on this model was the Mist Slate, also from 2023. And I think people give this this model a little bit of a hard time because it had such incredible hype, but now, and well, I guess during when they were actually releasing these things, it was definitely not the most popular model. Potentially a little bit underrated, maybe a little bit of a mixture of like over and underrated because there was so much hype in the beginning. But I've got to say the best colorway has to be this OG Quantum. I think it just defines the silhouette really well, and it's almost like they designed the silhouette with this colorway in mind. An underrated colorway would definitely have to be the high res orange. I just really like that highlighter color on this silhouette as well. And then the worst one has to be the teal one, just because there's nothing really special about them, and it just, yeah, it's just a color that's meh. Next up, we have the Yeezy 700 MNVN, another pretty dope pair of shoes. They only dropped 12 different colorways of these. This was the first or launch colorway that dropped back in 2019, and if you didn't know, these were actually designed in part by Christian Tresser, one of the most, I guess you could almost say, most important shoe designers on the planet. He actually designed the Nike Air Max 97 and a bunch of different shoes, and you can kind of tell because these stand out quite a lot from like the rest of the lineup, even though they share the exact same midsole as the regular 700s, like the V1s and the V2s. They've got the same boost. It's the upper that is really, really different, made out of some kind of nylon feeling material. Now, the last time you could have got a pair of these was 2022 when they dropped the laceless version, which I actually really like, and that was the white colorway or the analog colorway. In fact, my favorite colorway or the best colorway on the 700 MNVN is that laceless analog. I think it improves the comfort. It makes it a little bit more of a slip-on and off type shoe. The most underrated colorway though, I think has to be the phosphor or the like highlighter green pair. That is really, really nice, and I think it goes with this silhouette very, very well. And then the worst one, probably the resin colorway, just because it's like, it's not really here, it's not really there. It's just, yeah, meh colorway. Sticking with 700s, next up, we got the 700 V3. They only dropped 11 different colorways of this model. I guess it shows how much they liked the 700 because they did a V1, V2, V3, MNVN, the list goes on. Now, this is actually the launch colorway, the very first pair that dropped back in 2019. It's called Azael. And the very last time, or the last colorway that ever released on this model was the Fade Salt from 2022. This is a really kind of like a futuristic take on the 700 model. It doesn't have boost, which makes them a little bit less comfortable, but the upper is really, really cool, semi-translucent with this plasticky feeling mesh. It also glows in the dark, which is pretty sick. And just overall, it's definitely one of my favorite Yeezy models. It's a great silhouette, and I think this is the best colorway that dropped, the Azaels. The most underrated would probably go to the Kyanite, another very solid one. And the worst one, it just has to be the Copper Fade. Like, come on, it has to be those. Next up, the Yeezy 450. Only 10 different colorways of this model ever released, this being the first one, the Cloud Whites from 2021. And the last colorway that you could have got was the Stone Marine, I believe from 2023. But yeah, I feel like the 450s had a lot of potential. I just don't think they really achieved that potential. They dropped pretty much every single colorway was monochromatic, and this crazy looking shoe, you're telling me you didn't switch up the colors like the top to the weird outsole? Like, that would have been so cool. Yeah, there was a lot of potential here. I just don't think they had enough time to really flesh this silhouette out. Still dope and still a part of the Yeezy history, so yeah, I'm gonna say that this is the best colorway, the Cloud Whites. The most underrated, probably the Stone Flax colorway, the nice kind of grayish brown. And the worst one, probably just the Sulfurs, just that, you know, that kind of snotty yellow. Yeah, nah. Next up, we got the 500 Highs. This was a pretty interesting silhouette. I feel like they almost tried to attempt to do what they did with the 700s, where they had multiple different versions. They tried to attempt to do the same thing with the 500s, and it kind of worked. But in the end, they only released 9 different colorways of these, so yeah, definitely a little bit more scarce now. We're getting into that scarce territory where you don't often see too many of these floating around. The original launch colorway that dropped was called Slate Blue, and that one basically dropped back in 2019. Kind of towards the end of the year though, right in like the December time. The last colorway that ever released as part of this collaboration was the Mist Stone from 2023, and that is of course this one right here. And I actually think this is the best colorway. colorway. This is the best colorway that they've done. Just very simple, and I think it just works with this silhouette very well. It's a solid pair. This is the kind of neoprene material that I was talking about with the 500 lows. Makes them very comfortable, that puffy material. It's nice. The most underrated colorway, though, I think has to be the frozen blue. Just that pop of color with the nice white colors is really, really solid. And then the worst one, the sumac. Yeah. Definitely, that's the worst one. Next up, we got the Yeezy 700 V2. It's a little bit of a sad one because they only released 8 different colorways of this sneaker model. And they really stopped dropping them quite early because the last colorway that you could have got was the mauve that dropped in 2021. So there was like 3 years where there's just like nothing. This is the very first colorway that dropped, the Statics from 2018. And it is also the best colorway that dropped on this sneaker model. Again, it's a similar story to the Quantums, where it feels like they designed this sneaker with this colorway in mind. The most underrated, though, I think has to be the Inertias. That's always been a colorway that I really, really liked, and it's just, yeah, a little bit brighter, a little bit, you know, something going on, but still very wearable. And then the worst colorway probably has to be the mauve, because it's like, you know, it was nothing really new, nothing refreshing, and just, yeah, not my favorite. Next up, with only 6 different colorways that ever released, the Yeezy Powerphase. It's funny, I never really understood this model. It first launched all the way back in 2017, so it was like kind of part of one of the original Yeezy models. But it was really nothing special. It was, you know, this is just like an existing Adidas model that I guess they just stamped the Yeezy name on it. There was a few upgrades, like I've got like, this is one of the softest and nicest leathers I have ever felt on any shoe, which makes them so incredibly comfortable for what they are. Now, when they originally dropped back in 2017, it was the core white colorway that dropped first, and then the last release was only a couple years later in 2019 with the simple brown colorway. So yeah, I think the best one was the core white, because I think a white pair of shoes with this model is just like a perfect daily. The most underrated, probably the gray colorway. That one was really solid. And then the worst one, probably just the simple brown, because yeah, brown, suede, not the most popular choice. Next up, we got the Yeezy Knit Runner. We're getting into rare territory now because only 6 different colorways of these were made. Now, this very bizarre looking sneaker dropped back in 2021. The first colorway that released was the Sulfur. You remember, like the banana Homer Simpson ones? And then the last colorway that you could have got was this one. I thought it was my time to pick this one up. This dropped in 2023. It's called the Fade Onyx colorway. These are actually really comfortable. If you can get over the fact that they are like a bit odd, they just look odd when you're wearing them. If you can get over that, they are a comfortable pair of shoes and a nice kind of style to have if you did want to walk around in something that kind of just, you know, is understated, kind of looks like socks. Now, the best colorway I would say is the Stone Onyx. It's practically the exact same as this one, just a little bit darker. The most underrated I actually think is the Sulfur colorway, because I think it's just such a loud and crazy option. Not very many people would choose that, but I think once you actually throw them on with like some blue jeans, they look pretty cool. And then the worst one has to be the Faded Azure. Like, damn, those things just look like it was like a dye attempt gone wrong or something. Next up, we got the Yeezy 350 V2 Compact. This one is kind of like the ugly duckling of the Yeezys, but yeah, they only dropped 6 pairs of these as well. And it's also like, it's crazy because this is one of the more ugly ones, but the most comfortable one. So the first colorway that dropped on this model was called Slate Blue, and that released back in 2021. And the last time that they dropped a new colorway was 2023, the Slate Onyx colorway. Yeah, so this is a pretty bizarre model. It basically takes a lot of the 350 V2, like obviously it has the exact same midsole with the boost underneath, but then it replaces the upper for this insanely stretchy, and also like there's literally a memory foam pillow placed in between the knit above your foot. So they turn out to be like, yeah, insanely comfortable. Now, I've got to say, this is the best colorway that's dropped, the Panda colorway, just black, white, a little bit of gray on here. The most underrated, maybe the white ones, the Slate Bones, but yeah, there's not really too much in it. And then the worst one is probably the Slate Blues, just, you know, like that weird bluish upper with the brown midsole. Yeah, a little bit odd. Even more rare, we have the Yeezy 950. Only 5 different colorways of this shoe, boot, sneaker ever released. Now, this is actually one of the first Yeezys ever. I think it's like maybe the second or third. So they dropped all the way back in 2015, along with in the same year as like when they first dropped the first ever Yeezy. So they dropped a bunch of them all at the same time, all in 2015. So yeah, but this is basically the original one, the Pirate Blacks. I actually don't think this was a very popular pair of shoes when it first dropped. I think people were just like a little bit disconnected to them. They do have like a little bit of an odd look. They are classified as like a duck boot because this kind of rubber extends over the toe box. But yeah, I remember these sitting on shelves a little bit. They also retail for like $600. So yeah, it's a lot of money to sink into a pair of boots. Nevertheless, the quality is pretty insane, and it's yeah, it's a nice one to have for sure. Best colorway has to be this one, the Pirate Blacks. Most underrated, probably the Moon Rocks. And then the worst one, the Chocolates, just because I feel like I wouldn't wear them that often. One of the most iconic and one of the most rare Yeezys that you can find is this, the 350 V1, with only 4 colorways ever released. This is actually the second Yeezy model that ever dropped. They dropped back in 2015 with the launch colorway kind of being, I believe it was the Turtle Doves. And then the last one that dropped was 2015 as well. It was the Oxford Tan colorway. But I gotta give it to the Pirate Blacks as being the best colorway. These things are just, yeah, it's nice all murdered out. I think this is a pair of shoes that is extremely iconic, but yeah, they did make some pretty major leaps when they made the V2. It's just so much more comfortable, so much better looking, so much more durable, better quality. So yeah, they really made a huge improvement on these things, but nevertheless, these are definitely iconic. It's like one of those shoes where you look at them and they just immediately make you think of fake shoes just because of like how many replicas were floating around when these things first released. In fact, and don't tell anybody about this, but back in 2015, I had a pair of the Oxford Tans, except they were fake. Back then, there was no way of getting them. They were selling for thousands. I had nowhere near that kind of money, and I found someone selling them. I knew they were fake, and yeah, I was like, I rocked them, and I didn't tell anybody. Until now, okay? You know my secrets. Most underrated has to be the Oxford Tans for me. They hold a special place. I always loved that colorway. In fact, it could even be my favorite. I don't know. And then the worst one, maybe the Turtle Doves. Probably my least favorite out of the 4, but still a nice colorway. You're gonna hate me for this next one, but the next one is the Yeezy 750, which I do not have. And look, I thought about buying it for this video, but I don't have $3K to spend on those things. So yes, the Yeezy 750, the first ever Yeezy and Adidas sneaker. They dropped also back in 2015. That was also an all-star weekend kind of drop, and they launched with the first colorway called just like OG brown, light brown. I always thought that the 750 was pretty cool. It was never really my favorite Yeezy, so that's why I don't have them, because I don't have anything that's like, apart from them being the first and super iconic, there's not something about them that I am like over the moon about. But if I had to pick the best colorway, be the OG light brown. The most underrated, maybe the black, even though I don't think it's necessarily underrated. And then the worst one, probably the chocolate. But yeah, only 4 colorways of the 750 ever released. Even more rare, and for good reason, is these freaking things. The Yeezy Knit Basketball. Only 4 colorways as well ever released. Thank God. This is the worst Yeezy ever. These dropped back in 2021, and I think the first colorway was this one, which they called, what, the Slate Blue? The last one that dropped was the Slate Onyx colorway from 2022. Now look, the reason why I hate this shoe so freaking much is because these are literally damn near impossible to get on your feet. Now, look, I know it's hard to kind of understand when you're watching this through a camera, but if you just try at some point in your life, the times where I've tried to put these things on my feet, I end up sweating, I pull a freaking back muscle, or my ankle starts snapping as I'm trying to get these things on, and they're literally made like that. Like, it's not like, you know, I'm buying a shoe that's not big enough for me. It's literally that they just made them so freaking awkward to put on that you end up just being so frustrated, you end up hating these things. Nevertheless, the most underrated colorway, probably the Slate Azure, even though it's pretty mid. But the worst one has to be the Energy Glows, for sure. Next up, also with only 4 colorways to its name, the Yeezy Desert Boot. These originally dropped back in 2019. This was the launch colorway, the Rock. And the last pair that that you could have ever got was the taupe blue colorway from 2021. This is a pair of shoes that is aged kind of like beautifully. It seems like people like these more and more every single year. When they originally dropped, I feel like people were just kind of like, meh, you know, some people liked them, some people didn't, but now it's like crowned as one of the best, you know, sneaker boots ever. I really like them. This has to be my favorite colorway, the original rock pair. The most underrated though has to be those taupe blues. Just having that weird pop of blue at the bottom looks sick. And then the worst one, probably the salts. I just don't know if that colorway specifically works on this type of boot, you know, as like more of a rugged military style shoe. We are getting very, very rare at this point. This is the next one, the Yeezy 500 tactical boot with only 2 colorways ever released. You see what I was saying about them trying to make the 500 similar to the 700, but there's a bunch of different versions? Yeah, this is another version that dropped. So it has the exact same 500 midsole, it's just the upper that is significantly different. Funny thing about these is they originally launched in 2023. That's like a year post the collaboration ending. And then the last colorway that dropped was literally a couple months ago in 2024, the sand colorway. This is a pair of shoes that I feel like they would have done a lot of other different versions, different colors on, but I think it just came down to the wire. Obviously the collaboration was done. They had made 2 colorways and they were just like, hell, we've got all these pairs, we've got to launch them. But the history behind this pair of shoes, it goes pretty deep. Like Kanye and the team were sampling this pair of shoes for a very, very long time. This was like something they were sampling back in like 2020, 2019, maybe a bunch of different versions with different soles, but I think they were really trying to touch on some kind of military style shoe, and this ended up being the final product, which is really, really nice. It's super comfortable for what it is, but I just feel like it's very expensive, $300 for these things, so it didn't end up being that popular. Nevertheless, I actually think the best colorway is the sand one. I just think it matches the style of the shoe a lot more, and then I guess the worst one is these, but both of them are pretty solid. With only 1 colorway ever released, we got the Yeezy 450 Slide. I almost feel like they were like not supposed to release then, like, because these dropped in 2023 with obviously this is the only colorway. So obviously the collaboration had ended, and I just wonder if they made a bunch of these and then, like, you know, because of the collaboration ending, they were never going to release them, but now they were like, well, we've got pairs, let's just drop them. They were $110, which is very, very expensive for a pair of slides that doesn't even cover your feet. Like, you see your feet all the way through. But they did make this with the same kind of foam that's on the regular Yeezy Slide, so they are incredibly comfortable. But yeah, definitely a very odd creation, which I think is really sick. I am glad that they dropped these things because it's a nice pair to have as like one of those super rare limited Yeezys that is always just gonna kind of be there now that the collaboration is done. Piece of history. Oh, we are in the end game now, guys, because next up we have this insane shoe, the Yeezy insulated boot, with only 1 colorway ever released. Now, these originally dropped back in 2021 as an extremely exclusive US only release. I think they obviously knew that not that many people are going to be able to throw these on and walk out the door. Like, not only, I mean, are they like a crazy design where it's almost like a rugged foam runner boot style outsole, but they're also super like massive and blankety at the top. They kind of make you look like you're leaning forward, like when you're flat, they kind of lean forward, so it's like, yeah, it's an interesting, weird pair of shoes. But yeah, it's certainly one of my more favorite pairs of Yeezys just because this really does show that they were working on some insane designs that were kind of pushing the sneaker game forwards with just like, you know, just insane creativity. So these were called Khaki, the only colorway that they dropped. I know that they were sampling a couple different ones. Ye was seen wearing some black ones, which I wish dropped, but yeah. Obviously, we're here now, and it's over. Next up, and even more rare, is the Yeezy Knit Runner boot. Now, they only made 1 colorway of these. I say even more rare because I don't think we've seen any other samples of different colorways. Unlike the insulated boots where we saw the black ones, these ones just dropped and were only ever seen in really this colorway. So these also dropped in 2021, literally like maybe a month or 2 apart from those insulated boots. It was kind of dropped as like a crazy package. Just here, have our 2 craziest designs. This is called the Sulfur colorway. Very, very interesting pair of shoes that I am a huge fan of. They are insanely comfortable. They are designed and made in the USA. They are waterproof, and they show your shoe size for some reason. They literally out you. If you're a US 7, now you got it printed there. They're like soft on the upper, so yeah, they're super comfortable. These are, yeah, a really, really cool pair of shoes that I'm so glad that I managed to get and will always stay in my crazy Yeezy collection. But even more rare, and the final one on this list, which technically shouldn't really be on this list, it's the Yeezy 1050 boot. So the only reason I'm including it is because it is probably the closest to retail we ever had of a release which didn't technically release. So these are zero colorways of this release to the public. So yes, this pair of shoes is a sample. You can see on the tag over here, not for resale, a very, very solid sample. So these were pretty much like production ready. The only issue with these is that they ended up just being too expensive for Adidas and Yeezy to actually make. So they decided to make a bunch of different samples to gift out to different people. They gave these things out to a bunch of employees and they gifted it to a few different rappers and Ye's friends. But that is about it. There's rumored to have only 300 pairs actually in existence. It's a pair of shoes that I know was very, very close to a release at $400. I think December 2021 was the time when they were kind of teased to drop. Ye wore them to a Donda listening party and it got everybody excited, but unfortunately they never ended up happening. Technically shouldn't be on this list, but I thought I'd include them anyway because, you know, I spent a lot of money on these. I need a freaking, you know, hey, look at them. I spent like 2 to 3K on these things. But as promised, let's do a best, underrated, and worst for the entirety of all of the Yeezys put together. The best Yeezy that has ever released is the Yeezy Foam Runner. I think this is such a revolutionary and crazy design. It's manufactured or originally manufactured in the US. They did some China versions. It's in part made with algae. It's a design that really started the entire industry going in a direction of trying to make foam shoes. It's insanely comfortable. It's the best kind of foam clog out there in my opinion, and I think just a very innovative design. Definitely the best one. The most underrated, I think, is the Yeezy 380. I think these are insanely comfortable. They did some really cool colorways like this one, the alien blue, and I just feel like they got a little bit of a bad rap. People just didn't really feel them that much, but if you know, were kind of put off by the fact that only like, what, 10 different colorways were made, I think you should try them out. They're solid. The worst one, you know what I'm gonna say, is these freaking things. Like, don't make me freaking break my back trying to get my feet into them. This is the worst Yeezy ever. I actually hate it. I hate it. But there you go, guys. I thought this would be a bit of fun. This is a kind of a video that could just live on the channel forever because we're not gonna see any new Yeezys, I don't think. I mean, who knows? If Adidas decides to produce more of them, it would be wild and very terrible, but it's something that potentially could happen. Either way, I want to know from you guys. Give me those 3. What is the best Yeezy that is ever released? What is the most underrated? And what is the worst Yeezy? Out of all of the colorways, all of the models, drop it down in the comment section. And if you guys want to check out another video, all you got to do is click that one right over there.